Imagine every clock on Earth disappeared tomorrow. No phones, no watches, no sunrise app. How long before you completely lost track of time? In 1962, one scientist volunteered to find out exactly what happens when a human being loses every way of measuring time. Michel Siffre, a 23-year-old French scientist, climbed down into a glacial cave in the Alps and stayed there for 2 months. No clock, no calendar, no sunlight. He ate when he felt hungry and slept when he felt tired, with a one-way phone line to a team on the surface who logged every time he called, but were under strict orders never to tell him the actual date or time. When his team finally told him the experiment was over, Siffre thought he still had nearly a month left. He'd lost weeks without noticing. But here's the detail that matters more than his confusion. When researchers laid his sleep and wake times against real external time, his body had still been keeping a rhythm the entire way through, close to a full 24-hour cycle, entirely on its own, with nothing in that cave to reset it. Later, far more controlled lab studies refined the exact number, but the core finding held up. The human body runs its own clock in complete darkness without being told to. That's where the real story starts. Long before any sundial or water clock existed, every human already carried a working clock, run by a small cluster of cells deep in the brain that keeps time on its own, even with no light to reset it. Ancient humans didn't invent timekeeping from nothing. They spent thousands of years building external tools to catch up with a clock their own bodies had been running since before they were born. The most obvious early tool was the one already in the sky. The earliest evidence of humans using shadows to track the day goes back to around 3500 BCE, with massive obelisks in Egypt and Sumer, whose moving shadows marked out rough divisions of morning, noon, and afternoon. It's a strong candidate for the very first timekeeping device our species ever built, and it required nothing more than a stick in the ground. But that stick only told you roughly where you were in the day, not precisely how much time had passed. So the Egyptians refined it. By around 1500 BCE, they developed what's now called the shadow clock, a more advanced instrument with a long stem and a raised crossbar that cast a measured shadow across marked divisions. In the morning, you faced it east. At noon, you physically rotated the entire device to face west to keep measuring as the sun crossed overhead. It's one of the earliest scientific instruments we know of, built by people who clearly understood the geometry of the sun's motion in real detail, not just its rough position. Here's the part almost nobody expects, though. Ancient Egyptian hours weren't the fixed 60-minute units we use today. They divided daylight into 12 equal parts, no matter the season, which meant an hour in the long days of summer was noticeably longer than an hour in the short days of winter. Time itself stretched and shrank with the seasons. The idea of an hour as a fixed, unchanging unit, identical in June and December, wasn't standard practice until mechanical clocks forced it centuries later. But the moment the sun disappeared, humanity lost its clock. A shadow clock is completely useless the second the sun goes down, or when clouds roll in, and the Egyptians had to solve that problem twice, once for cloudy days, once for night. For cloudy days and indoor use, they built water clocks. The oldest confirmed example dates to the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, more than 3,000 years ago, a carved alabaster vessel that let water drain steadily through a small hole in the bottom, with marked levels inside showing how much time had passed. It didn't care whether the sun was out, and it turned out to be useful for something beyond religious ritual. In ancient Athens, water clocks were used to time speeches in court, giving each side in a dispute exactly the same amount of water and exactly the same amount of time to make their case. No judge could be accused of favoring one speaker with extra minutes. The clock itself enforced the fairness. For night, the Egyptians turned back to the sky, but this time to the stars instead of the sun. As early as the Old Kingdom, they identified specific groups of stars called decans, which rose at predictable, staggered intervals throughout the year. By tracking which decan was crossing a particular point in the sky, priests and astronomers could divide the night into hours almost as precisely as the shadow clock divided the day. It meant that for a culture with no artificial light beyond fire, night wasn't just an empty stretch of darkness waiting for morning. It was still measured, still structured, using the exact same instinct that built the sundial, just aimed upward instead of down at the ground. Every one of these tools, the shadow clock, the water clock, the decan stars, was solving the same fundamental problem. How do you make an internal, invisible rhythm visible in and shareable. Your own circadian clock is useless for coordinating a shared harvest schedule, a religious ceremony, or a court appearance because nobody else can see it running inside you. External timekeeping wasn't really an invention from nothing. It was a translation device, turning a private biological rhythm every human already carried into something a whole community could see and agree on together. That translation problem didn't stop with the Egyptians. It's the same reason the water clock kept getting reinvented and refined for the next 3,000 years by Babylonian astronomers, by Greek engineers who eventually built versions accurate enough to include moving dials, and later by Islamic scholars in the medieval period, whose engineers developed some of the most sophisticated water clocks of the medieval world. Different civilizations, different materials, different centuries, but always chasing the exact same goal: pin down that same invisible rhythm precisely enough that a whole community could set their day by it together, which brings the story back to that cave in the Alps. Siffre didn't discover that humans need clocks. He proved the opposite. Strip away every sundial, every water clock, every calendar on the wall, and something inside you keeps counting anyway, imperfectly, drifting slightly off a clean 24 hours, but counting. The first clock humanity ever trusted wasn't made of stone, water, or bronze. It was the one beating quietly inside the human brain all along.